I'm playing Phil Donahue tonight, and so I'll sit on this. That's an age check. First of all, it's great to be here. So yeah, Pat and Paul and Ian, thanks a ton for assembling. I'm Jeremy Kalin. I am a impact counsel attorney at Avisen Legal. That's Avisen. It's Old French and Middle English for advisor. And we are a boutique business law firm. I mentioned the term impact counsel because what we do is specialize my practice at the intersection of deep sustainability and social impact. So some of that takes the form of benefit corporations, cooperatives, nonprofit, and choosing the right entity, et cetera. And then I spend my time, I say "the" because I have yet to meet anybody who is this specialized, but I am one of the, if not the, community scale renewable energy tax credit lawyers. Thus, Nina calling me out, thank you. But I also have in the past and do today work with some innovators. Some of my colleagues do the deep work on helping both funds, some of which we'll hear from, still backup counsel to Brown Venture Group, and to innovators in helping to access capital. For instance, Avisen represented 75F in raising the largest Series A investment in Minnesota history, not Cleantech history, all of Minnesota history. That was actually my first comprehensive deal I had to work on. So it's a pleasure to be with you personally. I'm gonna then hand it over to panel. We're gonna do a sort of structured 15 or 20 minutes, but really once we get going, I'm gonna try to stay out of the way. I have some prompted questions, but gonna ask our panel to really assertively respond to each other, and then someone's gonna give me the 5 or 10 minute signal and make sure that if there are some follow-up questions from you all, that we can get to them. And I know that each of the three of them will be sticking around, and as happens at conferences and summits like this, you should be chasing them for advice and for opportunity, but we'll specifically structure the conversation to make sure that you have an understanding of how each of them engages with innovators and entrepreneurs and opportunities. So listen carefully, hopefully, so that you can understand who's gonna be best fit for you, and don't mob each of them, or all three of them, right? So a quick little personal note, like most lawyers, I have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Ceramics from the University of Minnesota, and I would come over to this building for my sculpture classes because my great-grandfather was Sig Harris. This is the old Harris Machinery and Warehouse. And my great-uncle Sig would say, come and find anything that you want here to incorporate into your found object sculpture for your sculpture classes, et cetera. And I did some pro bono advising when Nina was at the table helping to figure out Green 4th Street and the renovation of this Prospect North and redevelopment process. So it's really, really exciting for me to be here every time that I get to be here, because literally I'm the fourth generation of my family to be in these walls. Thanks, Nina, for choosing this spot. So Paul, Ian, and Pat, what I'd like you to do is to grab the mic and do a quick, make sure to like really swallow the mic so people can hear you all the way in the back. But if you could just very quickly introduce yourself, the name of your organization, and the real sort of elevator pitch, the essence of what your organization does.
Well, hello everyone. Is this good enough? Can you hear me? Okay, great. So my name is Pat Dillon, and I'm the founder and president of MNSBIR, which is Minnesota SBIR. And so we help companies in Minnesota, startup and existing companies, to access federal research funding to bring their technological innovation to life. And so we want to empower companies to convert that research into revenue producing products and services.
Perfect. Ian.
Good afternoon, Ian Adams with Evergreen Climate Innovations, not to be confused with Evergreen Energy here. Evergreen Climate Innovations is based in Chicago. We invest and support in early stage climate tech companies throughout the Midwest region. So we have a unique model where we take philanthropic contributions, capitalize a fund, and make pre-seed and seed stage investments in those companies and help them grow and scale.
And I'm Paul. Paul Campbell with Brown Venture Group. Wow, this makes me sound like extra deep here. I co-lead Minnesota's first Black and Indigenous-led venture capital fund that's focused on technology. Some things we do is we really focus on what are the barriers to economic and innovative contribution that some of our people we're trying to serve actually experience, and how can we collaborate to really think about capital stacks that enable entrepreneurs who oftentimes don't have access to friends and family rounds of investment because of not coming from generational wealth or artificially created poverty. Because the ideas are there, it's the capital that oftentimes is missing. And so people oftentimes want to over-mentor the people we work with and underfund, and it's kind of hard to get all the mentorship without the dollars. And we'll talk about that a little later, but delighted to be on this panel with such a great colleagues here and learn a lot from them. So, and by the way, if you don't know Pat Dillon, you should bum rush her first. She's the one you want to talk to.
Absolutely. So hold on to that mic, Paul, if you could, Dr. Campbell. Before we get into what you do today, each of you made a specific choice to be doing the work you're doing. And from a personal standpoint, it all involves money and capital raising, and giving out money and investing. So if you could share with us just 1 or 2 minutes, what's an early memory of yours, whether as a professional or as a child, for the role that money played in your life or the impact it could have in others?
Yeah, so I come from a long line of pastors and teachers and things like that from my family. So we never had a lot of money, but there's always this impact that we were trying to go after to make a difference in the community. And I realized there was all this heart, like want to make a difference, but it wasn't backed up by capital, so it wasn't really sustainable. So an early experience I had, I was in Africa helping training leaders who couldn't come to the United States. And we were going through this village and I seen these burnt down buildings and I said, hey, what happened here? And they said, oh, these different groups were killing each other. And I said, well, I've seen that happen before, but why did it stop? And what he said was, they stopped because they realized they were killing their customers. And so I was like, So I had this passion for business very early on, but in the circles that I was in, if you talked about business, it's almost like a 4-letter word to people, or money, not realizing that money has the ability to actually create sustainable solutions when you put it in the right context. Because really money's all about capturing contribution, valuing contribution, and that's what we all want to do. How can we contribute to our communities, to our places of worship, to our cities? And really that's all about having an asset that can facilitate really make an impact. So that's what for me was a really informative experience. And also coming from people who never had any money, realizing, oh, this is what it looks like to actually take those resources and apply. So
Awesome.
So when I was younger, I noticed some of the people that I was around got more Christmas presents and their parents drove nicer cars. And at the time, that frustrated me a lot. Moving forward, I realized I had a totally affluent upbringing and I just wasn't quite as well off as those folks. But it reminds me of how I see the evolution in climate tech funding in that landscape today. It's harder to raise money than it was 18 months ago. And it is hard for an early stage company to raise money and get the resources it needs to be successful and scale, but it's dramatically different and there are dramatically more funding opportunities than there were 5 or 7 years ago, where I'm an introvert and in 2018, I knew many, maybe most of the climate tech investors, and that's terrible, I mean, it's fine for me, but that's like 17 people or something.
Right.
Now you've got a landscape that is more mature, there are more specialized tools, there's more funding in general, so more opportunity there.
Awesome. Pat.
Well, this is a really interesting question for me that I just found out about 5 minutes ago or so. So I had to think about it. So I grew up on a farm in Wisconsin. We had dairy cows, we had pigs, we had chickens, and we had it all. Well, what we used to have was a big pickle patch. And so we would have to go pick the pickles. And then we would, put them in the burlap sack and then take it down to this little town. And this other guy would come pick it up and pay us for those pickles. And I thought, well, that was kind of being entrepreneurial. And then, growing up on a farm, I always thought it was just a way of life. But years ago, I came to the realization that, it truly was a small business. And we had the cows, and the cows produce milk, and you sell the milk. So you get that milk check every 2 weeks. And then I thought about all the buildings and the machinery and the hired hands, which were all my brothers and sisters. So it's like, I was thinking about, growing up on a farm and that being very much an entrepreneurial venture, but we didn't call it that.
Right.
But in many ways it was. And so that was one place to start. But then, tagging on what Paul said, the work that I do, and that our organization does is, we help companies access federal funding, and that is a complicated, overwhelming process. And I don't kid people. It's not something you learn overnight, and it's very competitive. And just like at the university, or other institutions, they have to compete for those dollars to support their research. Well, the same thing happens with small businesses. And it's hard work. I probably could have picked something else to do in my life besides that, but it makes a difference in the world. And we cover all areas of science and technology, not just energy. I was actually commenting to somebody earlier. I said this morning I was talking with about 20 different med tech companies. So now I got to switch my gears, code switch to energy. So, yeah, life is so much more rewarding when you can help somebody, help an entrepreneur, and when they bring that novel innovation to life. You're making a difference in the world.
Fantastic segue, Pat. Can you describe a little bit more of the ideal customer or client that you're working with? When are they ready to talk to you, and what services do you provide?
Well, you can talk to me anytime. And the best time to get started is now. So if you think you've got something that is worthy of federal funding, high risk, high payoff, you got to de-risk the technology to help move it along towards commercialization, that's a good fit. Not every energy opportunity is a good fit. We're usually at if you're familiar with technology readiness levels, 1 is basic research, 9 is commercialization. We're somewhere at that 2-3 stage and getting started. And you can imagine, of course, that we have the Department of Energy as one funding source, but then there's the National Science Foundation. The Department of Defense is very interested in energy solutions. So what we do is we listen to your idea, your concept, your project, and we have a nice little form that you have to fill out because I'm getting old and I can't remember all these things. So we want you to do that. We want you to answer 5 questions. One is, what's the technological innovation? What are the technical challenges and objectives associated with your project? What's the market opportunity? And tell us about your company and team. And then we want to know if there's any scientific or technical literature that supports your innovation. And based on your responses, we say, yes, you're in our Catalyst program, which is really where we do our coaching and support. But if you're not a good fit, that's also a good thing, because no one has 200 hours of time or effort to prepare an application to a federal agency. It is a major lift. So we want to do that vetting, that assessment early on in the process. But if you have a project that's a good fit, then we look at all the different agencies that could potentially be funding sources for your project. Now you might ask, well, what are the funding sources? Well, for some agencies, it's $200,000 for the first phase, and then maybe $1 million or more in the second phase. So there's the potential of $1 million+ to support just one project. And I often say that I never meet an entrepreneur with just one idea. So the goal is to target those agencies and then apply for funding for each of those projects that has a good fit with the SBIR and STTR programs. How many people have heard of SBIR and STTR?
How many people have not?
Have not.
Awesome.
Oh.
You got an audience here.
I do.
That's awesome, Pat.
So yeah.
We'll circle back in more detail.
One last thing.
Go for it. Yep.
It's your tax dollars, folks. That's what SBIR and SETR is. It's your tax dollars that are being invested in startups and small businesses.
Awesome. Thanks, Pat. Ian, you mentioned you raise philanthropic dollars and deploy. To whom do you deploy those dollars, and who are ideal folks for you to talk to, as first stage conversations? Who are the investees or clients that you're seeking?
Sure, these are typically pre-seed and seed stage startup companies, a lot like the folks coming in Pat's door, but a little further along. So typically have formed a company, may have gotten some money like an SBIR phase 1, or some angel dollars, or some friends and family dollars, or some gap funding from a university. Usually it's hardware in our case. We will look at software as too, but primarily hardware, anything in the climate tech space, so across the sector. We are interested in that climate impact, so if someone can demonstrate that, that's important. See, there's something that can prove viability or proof of concept is valuable, and clarity in terms of what they're selling and to whom, and like an identification with those customer pain points. Those are the things that come to mind, but it's early entrepreneurs. They may not really know how their business is going to be structured. They rarely have any commercial revenue.
And you're based in Chicago.
That's right.
Do you have geographic restrictions?
Yeah, so we are specifically focused on the Midwest. So we call that Pittsburgh to Denver, but anywhere in the Midwest.
I mean, who's offended by including Pittsburgh and Denver in the Midwest? But that's a whole different story. So Paul, Brown Venture Group, Venture Capital Fund.
Yes.
Who are you trying to engage with as investees, as portfolio companies?
Well, first of all, I'll talk to Pat. No. Seriously, the focus that we have, we invest all across the nation. But even though we're a venture capital firm, people, my sons say, well, I don't really like Shark Tank, Dad. Maybe we call you guys like Dolphin Tank. I'm like, I guess that makes sense that we're nicer, but we still have to do smart ideas. But I don't know about the dolphin noise as a way of showing, we focus on entrepreneurs from friends and family all the way to Series A. And the friends and family is because our research showed that many folks that were trying to go to like Y Combinator or Techstars for their accelerator programs, the model that they would often say is like, well, if you couldn't get friends, families, and fools to invest into you, then why should I? And our argument was like, well, how are they supposed to have this capital that didn't come from generational wealth? So baked into those models, you now have this major gap. And so oftentimes people say, oh, you're a venture capitalist, you're focused on these, BIPOC communities, so you must be a nonprofit. I said, not really. Over the last 30 years, we've missed out on $70 trillion by not investing into women and people of color. So if you are an investor and you do have a fiduciary to your folks that you're managing their assets, you need to be looking for deals within the community because it's basic math. You have an overgroup picture of contributors that are overpicked, and you have this undervalued asset on the other outside of that who is, if you can address some of these issues, and I'm getting to the point why I'm saying that, to remove those barriers. So one barrier that a lot of entrepreneurs have in getting to market is patents. So we partner with the USPTO, and we created an initiative called Pathways to Inclusive Innovation that highlights how the USPTO can give up to $10,000 of IP assistance to entrepreneurs. We also partner with federal labs such as NASA, NIH, NSA, and Department of Energy to say, hey, here's some technologies that in the Minnesota market, if we can find these resources, we can actually see a capital stack that they need to talk to SBIR with. And so what the entrepreneurs are looking for is undervalued assets. So if we can remove some of these barriers, they have a highest probability of success. Now, the interesting thing about our region, and I'll have to kind of be not Minnesota nice when I say this, in Silicon Valley, when you fail, you're a learner. In Minnesota, when you fail, you're a failure. So really, I try to remove that for the entrepreneurs who are already back because they don't come from generational wealth. How do we remove those capital stacks? So really, it's to partner with the local ecosystem. Says, hey, if we were to bring these technologies through NASA, through NSA, would you be a customer of these technologies? And if so, what kind of entrepreneurs are you seeing right now? And then by doing that, we can focus on from friends and family where they're getting some of that, in between $50,000 to $150,000, to then go after the technology from the commercialization office, which is like $2,500 to license the technology from NASA. And then they can put their ideas on top of that to the USPTO, therefore be de-risking it for me as the investor and also for everyone else that wants to look at this entrepreneur. So although I'm in venture capital, I'm really about removing barriers for those entrepreneurs that have upside potential.
And Paul, just to drill in a little bit more here, I'm trying to both make sure you can hear me and not get that high frequency feedback. So willing to be the first in at $25,000, $50,000, $100,000 if there's no other friends and family or first time, but low six figures is sort of target investment, right?
Yeah.
A team that's got their stuff together generally,
Mm-hmm.
and technology still needs to be the screen. Yep.
Yes.
And then someone of color, right?
Yes.
A founder of color involved in the process. Is that still your screen?
Yeah, so for Fund 1, we identified that Black, Latinx, and Indigenous technology founders was the reason for that. The reason why we did that is because by focusing on technology, we can bypass both gender and racial discounting that often occurs when you're getting into these investment communities. And then by partnering with NASA and others as a way to de-risk them as we're going to talk to these folks. But the goal is to create generational wealth and economic resiliency. In order for us to do that, although I very much appreciate the role of restaurants in gathering communities, we need to focus on higher margins so that we can create more folks that have access to capital to kind of get that flywheel going. And one interesting thing to know about that for tribal community members, people talk about BIPOC, but oftentimes they forget the I in BIPOC. Mainly because the largest issue is a relationship gap. Because we're not going onto the reservations and building community, community with those, you don't understand some of the challenges they have. And many of the tribal government businesses that are established, people won't touch them from a bank because they can't collateralize their land in order to become an asset. But by partnering with IP, intellectual property, through NASA and others, they have a mechanism that gives them a collateralizable asset that they can go to the bank with and start this process of this economic engine flowing. So we had to solve those kind of problems to be able to get the upside returns from those entrepreneurs in the technology space. But people think of technology mainly as computers, but you can really think about technologies that go into food preservation, right? A variety of different things. So those technologies do fit in our wheelhouse.
I mean, Cam's demonstration of infrastructure mapping is a great application of technology, as I was trying to pitch you, Cam, to Paul as we're watching your presentation. So, Pat, you were going to jump in.
Yes, so everybody always thinks SBIR is just for startups. It is not. We can go up to 500 employees, and as long as the company is owned and controlled, at least 51% by U.S. citizens or permanent resident aliens, and has 500 or fewer employees, including affiliates, they're eligible and they can receive awards. The other thing that seems to be sometimes a myth, which I think is changing now, in the world of SBIR, you better be thinking about commercialization from the very beginning. In fact, a phase 1 proposal, the first proposal, requires a market opportunity section. And then in the phase 2, which is where you really want to be, there's a much more deeper emphasis on the commercialization plan, how you're actually going to transition into the marketplace, who are your customers, your competition, your financing strategy, your revenue model, your IP, etc. So I always tell people that that's like a mini business plan, but at the end of the day, the agencies who are funding these projects, investing our hard-earned tax dollars into these companies, want to see a return on investment. And they also want to see outside investments to come in and support that project. Because the project is not going to be fully supported just through SBIR or the sister program, STTR. And so you have to be thinking about commercialization. You have to be thinking about other financial resources that are going to help support not only the company, but the commercialization of that technology. What was the other thing I wrote here? I wrote something else, but
It was profound.
it's profound. It is.
Well, so why don't I pick up on a conversation that we had in advance of the panel, because you just talked about the need to know your market and do market research. And we've certainly seen cohort members already talk about the landscape of competition and of customers. Ian, when you're talking to potential investees, are you asking about the minimum viable product and sort of what they're going to? Are you asking about the full scale, the opportunity, like how well do they know their customers? What questions are you asking, and what are you really both explicitly asking, and what are you listening for that's between the lines?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. We want to understand what they are coming to market with and whether that's compelling, and then sort of where they're headed, but they need to start somewhere. So where they're headed is often many years down the road, involves many years of successful execution to get there. So a lot of that has to do with whether they understand the challenges that the customer that they are trying to sell to has and are actually addressing their pain points. And so where you see companies or entrepreneurs sometimes struggle is that they come describing global pains, like we have too much plastic, we have climate change, which are real problems, but no one is individually the actor that is trying to deal with that, versus like, we are gonna hit a pipe and kill someone. That's like a more specific example from the previous presentation of a tangible pain point.
Add on to that too. So you said a key phrase, execution. So that is the thing that I'm looking for. Like, everybody wants to tell me the whole vision, but the thing about it is you got to understand that we are seeing a lot of people pitch us ideas. So you have to do your research before you make sure that we're the right kind of fund for you to begin with. And secondly, how are you going to execute? Because everybody has a plan, but it's a big plan to see us holding a vision. But if you're not really figuring out what that particular venture firm is investing in, and you can't show how you're going to execute, you're lost me. Because when you're an entrepreneur, you have to have institutional irrational exuberance, right? Otherwise, you wouldn't be doing the thing. You wouldn't be dreaming big. But you have to understand too, not everybody is as creative as you. They can't see so far, and you're making connections in your head that no one else is seeing. So I tell entrepreneurs all the time, you create your own dissatisfaction by being a visionary. You're seeing 10 years ahead, but you have to bring it back to the present and make it tangible and something people can understand. But most people lose me when they start talking about how big their plan is, but they don't have a clear execution. This is what I'm going to do with these funds at this time. And even though I think I'm the only one doing this, there's probably somebody else out there doing it. And so I need to make sure that I can execute, because that's going to make me stand out between everything else.
And am I here? So, if you think about what takes 10 steps to get to full commercialization and significant market uptake and major revenue, et cetera, are you asking for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, or do you just want to make sure that 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are solid, or at least have been thought out somewhat, and that there's a timeline to figure out 6, 7, 8?
Yeah, and I'd love to.
I'd love to hear all three. Yeah.
You got to think about the phases you're at. So I'll give this example. The purpose of a resume, if you got your first job, is not to get the job, it's to get the interview, right? Then after you get the interview, then you could talk about compensation, and after you wow them with your ability. Similar to when you're talking about how you're going to build things to commercialization. This is the phase that I'm going to take these monies and execute this, which will then lead me to the next phase. And I have to be thinking about capital. For me, I have to be thinking about all the different capital stacks along the way, because if we invest into your early stage, it's more risky. Where's your execution plan to get your next dollars? Not just coming back to me because you think it's a path of least resistance and I'll go back to you as a funder, but I have a plan in place to get to different steps. But I'll let Ian.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's also that execution, sort of where you're headed now. It's helpful to have a thesis for where one is going and what that scale opportunity looks like. So having an idea is good, but is not, it's like, it's often wrong, or a lot is going to happen between now and then. But I think it's like those execution steps, and specifically like, how is what you're doing unlocking value for for the investor from the investor perspective. Like how is value be accruing to the company and indirectly to the investor by that thing happening, and where is it change enough where it's interesting to a new set of stakeholders?
So the DOE, NASA, which probably it gets involved in energy, Department of Defense, National Science Foundation. I mean, they're not any different than investors because, of course they're investing our tax dollars into these companies and these novel projects that hopefully are going to get to commercialization. That is one good thing that has changed with the programs, because in the past it was all focused on just the science and the technology. But in today's environment, again, it's commercialization, and you're going to have other outside investments to support that commercialization pathway. Paul talked about licensing from like NASA and NIH and so forth. You're going to hear from Chris Gear from the University of Minnesota talking about the licensing, the tech commercialization office, and the venture center. But I often say that, you don't always have to come in with your own technology. There's a lot of federal labs and other universities that got technologies available for licensing. And this is a great way to get started. And then you come after SBIR, STTR funding to continue to de-risk the technology. And maybe you go out and raise some capital through investors, but do not discount all the technologies that we have already funded at our academic institutions and federal labs. I mean, it's literally sitting on the shelf, and it's just got to get out and get to the marketplace. And it's, it can be a long haul for that. Let's see what I was about. So SBIR and STTR federal grants, so that means you don't have to pay the money back, or it's a contract, which there's a deliverable then associated with that contract. Or then we may even have what we call cooperative agreements. So when the government makes an award to a small business, depending upon the agency, it will be one of those funding agreements. And so this is of course, there's rules and regs and requirements that come along with that, but most of the companies that we've worked with over the last 10 years, and we've helped 109 companies win over $100 million. A lot of that is with the National Institutes of Health, but there's certainly other agencies. So how many of you know of a company called Darcy Solutions? I love this company, and you know why? Because they have secured about $5 million in SBIR and STTR funding from 3 different agencies for 3 different projects. And they are executing, and they did it from the very beginning. 2018 is when the CEO, Brian, sat in on my sessions, and I always talked about having a multi-agency, multi-project strategy. And this company executed that strategy in spades. And this is what I encourage companies to do all the time. And again, I've not met an entrepreneur with one idea. So you put the plan together, and then you execute that plan, and you go after those dollars, because somebody's gonna win those dollars. And my perspective is it might as well be a Minnesota company.
So, how many's ever heard of technology commercialization? I'll show you. Okay. How many has ever seen the portfolio for NASA, what they have? All right. If you Google NASA T2, and you look at, if you Google NASA T2, and you look at, they have the whole portfolio of ideas there, right? The problem becomes it's almost information overload. So the question is, how do you figure out what opportunities make the most sense for your context? And I talk to people about creating a what not to do list. You have the to-do list, but it's more important to create the what not to do list, because we all have limited resources and limited time. So if you look at the technology readiness of the different ones, you want to find the ones that are between 5 and 7. So if you do a few tweaks, you can get to market. But these opportunities are available. And the thing I found interesting is they can solve problems for other agencies, because NSA doesn't talk to NSA. NASA doesn't always talk to NASA. So you assume I'm talking to NASA, you guys talk, they don't talk. So you can solve a problem within the same agency if you license the technology from that perspective, but it's really about creating that what not to do list. And I would argue too, in Minnesota, what are the areas that we do very well here? Well, clean technology is one of those areas. So if I'm in this room, I'm looking for the technologies from NASA that have something to do with clean tech that could solve problems for DOE or DOT. Because DOT and there's a lot of acronyms now. DOE, Department of Energy, and the Department of Transportation have a collaboration now because they're trying to figure out from the infrastructure bill how to get some of these projects out there. And if you position yourself by licensing NASA technologies, you can solve a problem for them that will get funding that will help you get non-dilutive capital. Now, for me as an investor, I love non-dilutive capital go to my entrepreneurs because that means when there's a liquidity event, I have a better upside. But the point is this, don't be afraid to say no to a lot of things. Narrow your focus when it comes to the opportunity that you have in the moment and what makes sense for Minnesota. Because if we can get first a federal customer or a state customer or a city customer, then you can build your business eventually to the private sector because first you're handling the need for public sector.
So I want to ask, so these are complicated challenges to navigate federal funding, federal grants, excuse me, if I focus this way, it won't feedback, to talk about licensing technology, to work on evaluating a deal offer, a contract, et cetera. If you could each describe maybe somebody that you should have on your team early and how, and maybe somebody that you don't need on your team yet.
I would say on your team you're building, you need to have an execution guy or gal to be on the team because as I'm a visionary on my team, you know this, right? But I have people on my team who can say, no, that's not what we should be doing right now. How can I take my ideas and make sure they're actually actionable? Okay, Paul, that's a great idea, but write it down for maybe 5 years down the road because right now we have today. We have to go on. You cannot go wrong by having an execution person on your team that understands how to work with you. Not saying kill your dreams, but just help you make everything sequential so you can get to where you want to go eventually. You have to, and they don't like them all the time. Because I tell you things you don't want to hear. But I've learned it's information. No, there's no such thing as a solo success story. Everybody has people in their lives that help them out, and so these people can help you out as you're finding those opportunities and those challenges.
And so like a general manager, an administrator, COO, any number of those sorts of roles.
Operational excellence, those kind of things.
Ian, what's another key member that you should have on your team or maybe don't
I'll give you one of each.
media.
I think, yes, that technical expertise for whatever domain you're in, if you're lacking that, that sort of like raises the red flag if you're in a technical domain. An early employee you probably don't need is like an initial salesperson. You will definitely need them eventually, but the founder is going to be doing all that selling initially. And like sometimes you see, or we see companies that are early, you bring in a salesperson and they're trying to the salesperson's not successful, and maybe could be, or maybe they couldn't have been, but sometimes it's because they haven't figured out exactly how to sell what they're trying to sell, and so they're sort of set up for failure there. So I think that doesn't need to be a first for hire.
Awesome. Pat, any other, when to hire a lawyer, accountant, finance, CFO?
Well, lawyers? No.
No, for real, right? We're not cheap. Even at our low rates, we're not cheap.
Okay, so I would say make sure you have a really good IP attorney, first and foremost, because that's the value in your firm. As far as corporate attorney, I think if you're going to be out raising capital, of course, you're going to have somebody that understands securities laws and so forth. I think that's really important. Accounting, to some extent, yes. I mean, maybe help with forecasting. But really, from my world, it's like you got to have the brains, the technical brains around the project. Because in my world of federal R&D, you have to convince that agency and those reviewers that your project is novel and it's impactful and that there's a path towards commercialization. And as far as the sales, that's years down the road for a lot of our projects. But professional expertise to support the startup and growth of that company, I think, is extremely important. And one thing that's really become an issue lately is the formation of the company. You know, do you pick LLC, S corp, C corp, B corp? You know, all those things have an impact on taxes, and of course, if you're out raising capital, they really like to see you as a C corp. So I think these are really critical questions that need to be answered very early on in the process.
I just want to reiterate and then come back to you, Ian. I can see that from a lawyer standpoint, you're last. No, just kidding. From a lawyer standpoint, it's fine to be a single member LLC or a few of you coming together for that LLC. You don't need to incorporate as a corporation out of the gate, but it's really that first offer of money on the table that should be that trigger that says, oh, now it's worth it to spend. If I'm getting $250, for instance, from Evergreen, I need to budget $5,000 or $10,000 minimum to think about my corporate structure, because then that's going to invite Paul to come in as follow-on funding, Brown Venture Group or another VC or someone else to come in on top of that, because you're going to make that next ask easier. But as Paul knows, when I've done due diligence for Brown Venture Group, the first question I ask is the question that you've asked, is does the company have their intellectual property protected? I will literally just take the company name, I'll look at it, we'll do a who is search on their website, just making sure that everything is owned by the people it should be owned, or that inventions are indeed assigned to the company, because they're not investing, while we are investing in the people, we're actually investing in the company with the inventions assigned to the company and the people leading the company. I don't want to just invest in you. I want to invest in the company you're building, because that's actually the vessel that we're going to do great things and change the world in. But I'm putting my trust in you to build that company well. So if it's just sitting on your side, that's not going to do it. You're going to have to make sure that things are well vested in the company. And the same is true on the federal funds as well. Ian, you had something, Pat, you're as loquacious as I am.
One more thing. So like Paul said, rarely does one person do this all by themselves. And so you not only have this professional expertise that you have available to you, but you also have your advisors, or maybe even people that you would invite to be on your board of directors or so forth. Just be careful about who you ask to be on your board, because things can kind of get squirrely at some point. But, your advisors are really important. And then even in the SBIR and SCTR programs, I like to see other advisors supporting that entrepreneur, that business, because you don't know everything. And if you think you know everything, then you're mistaken about that. So you need to surround yourself with people that you know and you trust to help guide you along this incredible journey that you're on.
And we'll be truth tellers. Remember also from a legal standpoint, an advisor doesn't need to be on your board of directors. In fact, some of the nonprofits that are the most high visible nonprofit organizations in the world have the minimum board of directors of 3 people. The list that you think of as their board is just their advisors. So it's the governance board versus those advisors. So think about whether you need to give away equity, give away ownership, have somebody in your business, literally, telling you what to do every day, or whether it's an advisor. I am really pleased to say that I've been involved with Grid Catalyst from the beginning as an advisor to Nina that we touch base with, or she calls me when she's got a question. I have zero governance role other than Avisen as Grid's lawyer, but I'm not actually her lawyer. It's other people in the firm or Grid's lawyer, because she doesn't need me as part of her governance. And that is the exact role that I would encourage you to think about, those champions and truth tellers, but believe in your cause. Remember, if you have somebody with you that doesn't believe in your cause, they're going to be like frenemies, right? They're going to be in your way more than they are going to be making it happen. Thanks, Ian.
I think similar point you already made, actually, about, right, not everyone that is supporting you needs to be on a cap table or something. Right. So understanding which of those things are reversible too. If you have a mentor and you decide you don't like them anymore, you can just stop talking to them. Exactly. Somebody that's on your board of directors, you have to keep talking to.
I'm gonna give you guys this this little. I would like to give nuggets when I go to places because I hate sitting in places and not getting anything to take away from them. Beware of VC LARPing, live action role playing. They can write checks, but they can't create value. So I have 3 customers. I have my investors. How am I creating value from them? I have my portfolio companies. How am I creating value for them? And I have the federal government. How am I creating value for them? When I focus on those particular areas, it helps me to first create value before I'm extracting value. And so a lot of times you see people, they know you're in a tight position, and they know they need money, especially now in today's investment community opportunities. So they're gonna say, hey, this is a deal, take it or leave it. But not all money is good money. And if I can't create value for my entrepreneurs, I don't necessarily want to work with them because it's a one-sided thing. It's got to be a win-win situation from that standpoint of view. The other thing too is you got to realize, like, a lot of times people go to these events and they'll speak on panels just like this, but sometimes they only had 2.5 more months of experience than you did. And they're really not able to provide you with insights that are going to help you, advance your business. So you want to be on the lookout for those people who can only write checks but can't create value. And I'd say the third thing is, like, it's not always obvious what the opportunities are out there. We're taught that the federal government doesn't really have a place in business, but when you actually look at many of the ecosystems that have been developed, like Silicon Valley and the I-28 corridor, there was a significant amount of federal funding that went to de-risking those areas, but they never captured it in the dollars that went, as they're looking at how much dollars are going to communities. So you can even look at Tesla and SpaceX. A lot of these businesses that Elon Musk had to be de-risked by the federal government, and they were there because that's what they're designed to do early stage, to do some of these things. But don't just assume that the federal government's not the place for you, but always think about who is your customer, because if you can't create value for those people, it's not gonna help you out.
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions.
My question is most likely for Pat. Katie is from Carva. Nice to see you.
Oh, nice to see you.
Do you ever foresee a future where female founders will ever be 50% instead of 51% with the ability to get funding?
Well, you got to talk to the SBA about that.
Do you want to just repeat the question in case?
Okay, the question is, will there ever be a day where they recognize 50% rather than 51% women-owned? That's a Small Business Administration, and that probably would take an act of Congress to change that. Yeah. Nice to see you.
Other questions, or do you want to wait for the opportunity to corner each of these 3 and say, help me raise some money or introduce me to this technology?
I have one thing.
Great, go for it.
There you go. To the degree, I gotta address this issue of gender diversity and diversity in general in the marketplace. 80% of deals in the VC community come from people they already know. So because of this relationship gap, that means that you're not really finding those deals that come from these underserved communities because you lack a relationship, and you really need to focus on forming a relationship. As a result, when women come to me and say, hey, I really want to get into the VC space, I want to work with you, I said, do you want to launch your own venture fund? And like, what do you mean? Because I can't have my biases prevent execution. Go back to execution, right? And right now, if it's only guys running the fund, whatever color their race they are, you still have this whole group of women that I don't understand some of the challenges that women are trying to solve, because obviously I'm not a woman, but it's important that people actually get access to allocating capital, because you're gonna find deals that I can't find. And so I find that when you have communities are like, how do we see all these trillions of dollars come, and not be realized? Well, because there's a relationship gap, and then until we actually solve the access to that relationship gap, we still need to have asset allocators that are women-led. And I will teach anybody who wants to learn how to do VC, because it's not enough for just us to be in this space. We need more women fund asset allocators.
So I think we need to wrap up, but I want to avoid feedback and just give a quick shout out first to Paul and Brown Venture Group. was doing the work long before George Floyd in 2020 and really building. There are now, I have to take off my shoes and socks to now count because I have to count with digits. The number of people of color and BIPOC-led or BIPOC-focused funds just in the Upper Midwest. And Paul, you were one of the very first to do so and are kicking it, so congratulations to you. Ian, thanks for making the trip. Yes, give. And Evergreen, formerly Clean Energy Trust, right? When I first got engaged right out of the legislature and figuring out clean tech and economic development, y'all were already up and going and really, paving the way. And some of the 75F is one of the companies that you invested in very early and resulted in now a Series B and just, doing an awesome job. And so thank you for being there to continue the work and keep growing it. And I know that we hope that Grid Catalyst can follow in your footsteps at scale of impact. And Pat, for long ago, Minnesota has said we have been left behind on the federal funding question. And it is this technical assistance and expertise in connecting these dots. When I co-chaired the state's Green Jobs Task Force and we identified back in 2008, and we identified this major gap in spite of being leaders on policy and innovation. You're making it happen and continuing to do so, and so thanks for your great work. Find these folks, help them raise your money. Thanks, Nina.
Thank you, everybody. That was compelling all the way across. I'm so grateful that all these folks are in our community, and they're just fantastic. We are going to take a short break. Y'all are becoming my favorite rowdy people, and I know I'm just gonna take a minute to bring you back, but that's okay. We got fresh coffee coming out. There are some little snack bars, granola bars. Get your blood sugar back up for the last conversation of the day with innovation in higher education. A couple of final announcements. So we did find a phone in the back that has some sort of a pink background on the case. So if that's your phone, I think it's like Bose or something. I might be totally wrong here, but Lily has your phone if you're missing it. Also, after the innovation in higher education, we'll have some closing comments from Kevion Ellis, our program manager, and we are expecting Kevin McKinnon from DEED to come in and speak at the end as well. And then we'll have a little reception, and you'll finish all these conversations continue all these conversations you had going today. I just want to say one more thing before these folks leave the stage, which is, Jeremy kind of alluded to it, but having your kitchen cabinet and having the people that you go to challenge you and help you and you trust, so incredibly important. And so to be able to look across this table and see people that I'm so lucky that I can go to and say, help me understand this problem, help me do this better, let's figure out how to do it together. And Jeremy Kalin, one of the very first phone calls, I get the little chills, right? Of hey, let's go do this. So just really, really grateful for all of you for not just being there for me, but for this ecosystem. You're just tremendous. So one more round of applause for these folks.